If you would find the Gospel of Matthew, the 25th chapter. I'm going to start today a series of about 6 Sundays where I'm going to do show and tell. So I'm going to bring stuff to church and we're going to talk about it, and that will be the springboard for the sermon that we're going to be preaching. And each of those kind of has a sense to it that I think will be valuable, and I think that'll play itself out and you'll understand. Some are things that I've brought in before, some are fairly new. This is kind of an old one. This is one that I've had multiple times. About every year or so I bring that in. But it is a lamp. And it's terracotta. Not very big. But that's a lamp that is, well, maybe I'll just tell you the story behind it. In 1981, I actually did graduate from seminary. I just want you to know that. I did graduate. Master of Divinity, Kansas City, Missouri, Midwestern Baptist Theological Seminary. And when the year that I graduated, there was a gentleman in the area, a fairly wealthy businessman. His pastor had gone to Israel and come back and just was able to talk about things in the Bible in a different way. And he was so impressed with that, he set up an endowment for a seminary student who was graduating, who was going to be a pastor, to not have to wait until he'd been in ministry for 25 years to go to Israel, but to do it at the very beginning of his ministry. And I got that gift. And so we graduated, and within about 3 weeks, Karen and I, all expenses paid, couldn't have dreamed about doing it any other way, got to go to Israel. And we went with a gentleman who was a professor of archaeology. We went to Egypt. We did lots of amazing kinds of things. Did some things that you don't normally do on a trip. But one of the things is, he suggested that while I was there, we ought to look into a shop in antiquities. And so we went into a shop, and this lamp is 2,000 years old. It was excavated in Hebron, which is in the southern part of Israel. It's dated to be about 2,000 years old, the time of Jesus, and he suggested and encouraged me to buy it. Well, at the time, there were a lot of those. It really was not very expensive at the time. And so I bought that lamp. It took me a few years to figure out that it still worked, and you could actually put oil in it, and you could light it, and it could do that. And so I've used this periodically. About 2 or 3 years after that, the nation of Israel shut that sale off. They said anything excavated belongs to the government, and they took control of it, and if anybody sold it and they only sold to museums, you can't buy this stuff anymore. I have no idea what I'm going to do with it. I don't know whether my son-in-laws will fight over it or not. Not sure. Maybe we'll just break it someday or bury it in the backyard. But it is a 2,000-year-old lamp, and it gives you the idea of Thy word is a lamp unto my feet and a light to my path. Well, that's the kind of lamp they were talking about. Don't take a lamp and put it under a basket, but put it on a stand where everybody can see. Well, if you don't have it up, you don't see very much of it. Obviously, today, we're going to talk about a passage about some young women who have lamps, and 5 of them are very wise in the way that they carry their lamps, and 5 are not very wise. And so that's the analogy. So it does work, and it's not real complicated. Olive oil, you actually can burn other kinds of oil, but olive oil was the most common thing in Israel. It has a little hole in the top, and then a little place for a wick to stick out. And so I probably need to put a little more oil in. And the oil soaks up into the wick. The wick can be made of cotton, it can be made of linen, it could be made of wool or any other kind of thing. Typically, you trimmed the wick. I don't know if you ever know about kerosene lamps, but if you have a lamp that draws anything up into a wick, the wick gets ashy and the light is not as bright. And so you had to trim the lip. I don't know that they had scissors in the time of Jesus. I'm not sure, but I'm not messing with a knife and bleeding while I'm here. So anyway, you trim the wick a little bit. Okay. Then let's see, get it out just a little. And once the oil has had a chance to go in there, you light it. Maybe you light it. It's worked every time, but remember it's 2,000 years old, so there can be a little bit of we're cutting it a little bit of slack. When you and I get to be 2,000 years old, let me get that out just a little bit. Voila. That's it. It's not a really big deal. This is not rocket science. It's not really complicated, but there's a simple process. You have the lamp that's made out of clay, terracotta. You have oil that goes up into a wick, and you light the wick, and it provides light. And in a world where you don't have thousands of watts in the room, that's a pretty bright light. Now, the passage that we're going to look at is about this idea of a wick, of burning, and about some women who brought extra oil because they were going to run out, maybe, and some who didn't. This will burn for about 2 hours if it's filled, and that's how long, maybe a little bit longer. I don't let it do that very often, but that's the passage. That's the idea of a lamp, and so that's kind of burning. The story, and maybe the way to think about it, has the term fools, foolish, and wise in it. And so maybe we're going to think about this light as the light of wisdom for living our life. And Jesus is going to tell a parable about the ultimate foolishness and the ultimate wisdom. And obviously, in the end, it has to do with being ready for eternity. So, beginning in Matthew chapter 25, then the kingdom of heaven will be like 10 virgins who took their lamps and went to meet the bridegroom. 5 of them were foolish, and 5 were wise. For when the foolish took their lamps, they took no oil with them. But the wise took flasks of oil with their lamps. As the bridegroom was delayed, they all became drowsy, and they slept. But at midnight there was a cry, "Here is the bridegroom, come out to meet him." Then all of those virgins rose and trimmed their lamps, the wicks. And the foolish said to the wise, "Give us some of your oil, for our lamps are going out." But the wise answered, saying, "Since there will not be enough for us and for you, go rather to the dealers and buy for yourselves." And while they were going to buy, the bridegroom came. And those who were ready went in with him to the marriage feast, and the door was shut. And afterward the other virgins came also, saying, "Lord, Lord, open to us." And he answered, "Truly I say to you, I do not know you. Watch therefore, for you know neither the day nor the hour." It's kind of a strange passage, strange idea. First of all, it not only carries the idea of about lamps, but it also has to do with marriage customs in biblical days. And basically there's a couple of ideas. Arranged marriages. I had 3 daughters. I think I should have gotten to arrange their marriages, and I don't think they didn't like that, didn't even agree with it, didn't even consider it. But the idea of arranged marriages in those days, it was very common that if a bride lived in one town, the groom who she would be betrothed to lived in another. Part of it would be distant family, but distant enough for various reasons. And so there were a lot of reasons for it. So it wouldn't be unusual for a bridegroom to live in another town altogether. And when the day was set for the wedding, the day that he was going to come and collect his bride, there was really no way of knowing for sure when he would get there. He's got to travel, he's got to leave, we don't know how long it takes, there's a certain amount of uncertainty. So the bride and her attendants, these 10 virgins who are young women who are all hoping to get married someday, I think we could call them bridesmaids, they are waiting with the bride, and nobody knows for sure when the groom is coming. But normally weddings were done after sundown. That's kind of the way they were done, so nobody knew for sure they were waiting. The other option that's kind of suggested by a lot of Jewish historians is that there was also a custom of a journey in the village that they lived in, or the small town, to come to get the bride by way of walking through all of the streets. So that at a certain time, the groom and his attendants would sort of start a parade. And they'd walk downtown, or they'd go through the marketplace, and everybody in the marketplace would stop them and greet them and wish them well and ask them a blessing and maybe invite them into a home for some drink and some refreshments, or maybe stop and say, "We have a gift for you and the bride." And as they would go through the town, they might stop at 20 or 30 homes. They would stop at the homes of all of their relatives. They would stop at the homes of anybody important, of their good friends. And they would travel, just the groom and his attendants. People would say, "Come in," and they'd give them a gift. And then his attendants, his guys helping him, would carry those gifts. And they'd make this parade all the way through the town. And there was really no way to be precise. There was no wedding announcement that said, "At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, we're having this wedding at First Baptist Rabbi Church." Anyway, someplace. There was no time. It was just set. And obviously, the more homes you stopped in, and Eastern hospitality, you just couldn't come in and get the gifts and run off. You had to sit and visit. And so there really was no way of knowing. Now, this is kind of an extreme situation where the groom has made his journey through the town. He's coming to the bride's house, but he doesn't get there until almost midnight. Well, the bride's waiting. The attendants are waiting. They've all brought lamps because he's going to come and get her, and then they're going to have a further parade, and they're going to go to wherever the wedding banquet, the wedding feast is going to be. And all of the attendants need their lamps to be able to be a part of the procession. And 5 of them were wise enough to think, "You know what, if he takes a long time, we may need some extra oil," and they brought some. They were prepared. And there were some who didn't. And they began to run out of oil, and they ended up missing the parade, they missed the coming of the bridegroom, and they ended up missing the wedding feast. Well, that's pretty powerful imagery. And you understand that Jesus is telling this story during the Passion Week. He's only a few days from going to the cross. He's only a few days from dying on the cross, and then 3 days later rising again, and then eventually ascending back into heaven. It's almost as if Jesus, in these last moments, is telling one of the most important stories that He can tell. And of course, you understand we have that image of the bridegroom, that Jesus is the bridegroom who is coming again someday. And we as the body of Christ are the bride waiting for the bridegroom to come and get us. And of course, there's a tremendous sense about being ready, and that's the main part of this passage, and we'll get there. But in the passage, there's also this real focus on wisdom and foolishness. Biblically, wisdom is a concept that we really need to understand. Wisdom is not the same as knowledge. There are people who know all kinds of stuff. There are people who would be killer on Jeopardy. Every night they watch and they know all of the answers and they would risk everything, and they go to trivia nights, and they're great at that. They have all kinds of knowledge, but you understand, knowledge is not biblically wisdom. Wisdom is about choices. It's about making decisions. It's about choosing. And the reality is there were wise women who made a good choice and a good decision to take extra oil. There were some others who were foolish and did not do that. But the other part is that wisdom implies that in every decision that you and I make, there are consequences. That's one of the most biblical things. That you and I are personally responsible for our actions. That we make choices and decisions, and every choice and decision that we make has a consequence. There is a result to it. It goes and starts in the Garden of Eden when Adam and Eve are there, and God gives them a decision to make, either to eat of the tree or to not eat of the tree. And they make a poor choice, a foolish choice. They disobey God, and there are consequences for all of the world from that moment on. The reality is that we all make choices and decisions every day. Sometimes they're small. Touch that. Oh, that was not a good thing to do. That's probably hot. There's all kinds of decisions that you and I make, and every one of them can either be good choices and good decisions that are wise, that bring about blessing. or we make foolish choices and foolish decisions that end up hurting us. And the reality is that most of our decisions, in their wisdom or in their foolishness, typically don't just affect us as consequences, they affect other people. In fact, the reality is most of you have had some unfortunate experience in your life at some point because somebody else made a decision that was not a good one, and you got hurt as well. Wisdom, consequences. And a part of wisdom in this passage is also the idea of thinking ahead, considering the future. Now, biblically, we're not supposed to worry about the future. In fact, I'm always a little concerned. The King James Version of the Sermon on the Mount uses the phrase, "take no thought for tomorrow." Really, that's not a good translation. It's okay to think about tomorrow. It's not okay to worry about it. It's not okay to obsess about it. It's not okay to become to the place where you sacrifice the peace of today and you can't sleep tonight because you're worried about tomorrow. But all of us think about tomorrow. In fact, this parable is the idea that the wise girls are the ones who thought ahead and considered some possibility they needed to prepare for. And foolishness says, I don't think about tomorrow. I don't think about the consequences. I don't think about anything else. I just live today and in my own mind. Well, it doesn't work that way. In fact, the other part is you also get this concept of procrastination is one of the most foolish things that anyone can do. We don't rush in to make decisions, but you and I have to make choices and decisions. They need to be good ones, and we do need to seek godly counsel. We need to gather information, and then we make choices. As far as procrastination, I did find a list of 7 general areas that most of us probably tend to procrastinate about certain things. And these are in ascending order or descending order, the one that people tend to do the most. In surveys, people tend to procrastinate about exercising, eating healthier, and losing weight. Aren't you glad you came to church today so I could say that? Yep, we've struggled about that. It's January, February, we got past Christmas and all of those things about how we're going to start eating and what we're going to do, well, they've kind of faded, but that's an area that we tend to procrastinate about. Cleaning and organizing clutter. That's another big one on lists. Getting that closet cleaned out, getting that stuff. Okay. Sorting finances, doing your taxes, and getting bills organized. That's an area that almost all people say, yeah, we struggle getting that done. It's in the drawer somewhere, and I can't find it in the drawer because I needed to organize the drawer, and too fat to get up out of the chair to go to the drawer. I don't know. Conflict, personal relationships. When there's conflict at work, we know we ought to deal with it. We ought to have a conversation. We ought to go and apologize or ask for forgiveness. And personal relationships. And unfortunately, people say they struggle with that and they put it off, and a day becomes a week, and a week becomes a month, and sometimes years where we've not had the conversations we've needed to have for family and for workplaces. Going to the doctor. Yeah, I know I'm probably having a heart attack, but if I go, he'll probably tell me I am. So I just put that off. That's kind of a thing where, we hear so often about somebody, I knew there was an issue, but I just kept putting off going, and that what might have been a small problem if I'd gone 6 months ago is now a big problem. Car and home maintenance. Are you supposed to change the oil in your car every once in a while? Is that, yeah. Things that we put off. Now, the one that I put in here in particular, because it is in the list, is saving for retirement, doing your will, making end-of-life arrangements, and getting that taken care of. And I kind of wanted that to be in this discussion about wisdom because Karen and I are thinking about that stuff. In 1981, we went on the trip, got back, and I started pastoring my first full-time church. Started getting my first full-time salary, and boy, that was exciting. And after being in poverty during school all those years, and I began to get nagged by other pastors, and particularly older pastors, old guys. That's the only way I know to say it. My dad was one of those old guys, and a lot of his friends, and all the other old pastors I know. And they all said, now, Roger, you're just getting started. You need to start setting something aside every month for retirement. And you need to start planning for some of those things for later on. And I frankly thought they were just out of their mind because I was 25 and probably going to live forever. And they're out of their mind. That's crazy. I'll have time for that. And they just kept nagging and they just kept nagging. And my dad just kept saying, so son, have you set some aside out of your salary? And so finally, just to get him off my back to some extent, we set aside $50 a month, 1981. Started setting $50 a month for a retirement program. And I will tell you, that first year or so, we already had one child and then had another one coming pretty quick, and that's $600 a year. I really thought we had other places we could have used that. There were other things that would have been better, but not because we were so wise, but because of the encouragement of others, we started doing that. And after a while, we decided we didn't miss that $50 a month, and the next year, got a raise, and so we put a little bit more and raised it up a little bit. In fact, in a few years, we were doing $100 a month for retirement, and still was a dream. It was long into the distance. Well, I'll just tell you, in recent days, I'm really thankful for some of those folks who've gone on to be with Jesus, some of them, but I'm glad they encouraged me to do that. And a part of choosing to retire is really not motivated by it, but I can. We can. And we can eat more than peanut butter and dog food. I mean, we'll be able to eat. We'll be able to do stuff. Now, we're not going to be independently wealthy, but we're going to be able to do that in part because of wisdom. You understand, it's about thinking about the future. And wisdom is about not procrastinating any of those kinds of things. And we're all going to struggle with some of that. But you have been generous with Karen and I over the years. But we've also tried to be wise, and we've gotten out of debt, and we've not done credit cards where you've borrowed things, and we've paid off everything, and our house is paid for, and we've tried to make good choices and decisions, and hopefully that's the picture of wisdom. And I may not get many more times, so I'm just telling you, wherever you are, wisdom says, act now, decide, choose, make a decision, and do it, because it will be a blessing down the road. Now, that was not really for free. It's part of the sermon. But that's not the real heart of the passage, because there's an ultimate wisdom and an ultimate foolishness. And the ultimate wisdom has to do with being absolutely certain that you are ready for the day of judgment. That you are absolutely ready because you have prepared and you have done what was necessary to enter into the wedding feast of heaven, to be a part of the kingdom of heaven forever and ever. You have made the choices and decisions that are necessary. So when death comes or when the bridegroom comes, either one, you can be ready. And when the door is open, you can step through. And the tragedy of knocking on the door after it's too late is not yours. Now, the analogies are very simple. The concept of the wedding feast, the great banquet. In fact, this parable is one of three parables in a row in the Gospel of Matthew, the 25th chapter of the three parables. And they're all about being ready for standing in the day of judgment. There's this parable about the wedding feast and the door to be open. Then there's the next chapter talks about the parable of the talents and the master who is going to come back and is going to require an accounting of his servants. And there's either going to be being cast out for all of eternity, or there is going to be entering into the joy of the master. Or then he gives the one called the sheep and the goats, where there is the great white throne judgment and everyone stands before him. In other words, Jesus, before he goes to the cross, says, I want you to understand that the wisest thing you can ever do is be sure you are ready for eternity. Now, what does it mean to be ready? Well, enough other Scripture tells us it means that you have believed that Jesus Christ was the Son of God, that He came into the world, that He died on the cross for your sins, that He was buried, and on the third day He rose again, and today He is willing to forgive your sins and to save you from your sins and to take you into His family. Number one, you must have a relationship with Jesus Christ, having trusted Him, having followed Him. And there's a second part that if that's genuine, if you've really done that, then there's also the understanding that that decision will affect all of the other decisions of your life. In other words, He becomes the Lord of your life. Romans chapter 10, verses 9 and 10 talks about believing in your heart that God raised Jesus from the dead and confessing with your mouth that Jesus is Lord. Now, these other parables really get down to how did you live? How did you behave? And literally, being the sheep and the goats, the difference is some of them obeyed God and some of them didn't obey God. So to be ready for the day of judgment, the light of wisdom, the ultimate wisdom, is to be absolutely sure of a personal faith in Jesus Christ that then affects the way that you live every day. And if that's the case, whenever the bridegroom comes, we're ready. Whenever death comes and I go to see the bridegroom, you're ready. And that's the ultimate wisdom. And the ultimate foolishness is to not take care of that while there's time. I've always thought it was kind of hard on those other girls. I mean, they're probably teenage girls. They're young. I mean, in the parable, it just seems kind of rushed that they show up late and they weren't ready at the right moment, but there is a time frame. For us, the time frame is from the moment that you and I are unable to understand who Jesus Christ is and the nature of sin until we breathe our last breath in this world or until Jesus Christ comes back. And nobody knows for any of us when that's going to happen. And the ultimate wisdom is to be sure that you're ready. And today, I hope you have that. I hope you have that certainty. And in fact, there's the procrastination business. To put that off is such a dangerous thing, to be absolutely sure that you're ready, that you can go to a time that, yes, this is when I acknowledge Jesus, and this is the moment where His light started in my life, and this was the moment that I began to serve Him and follow Him, and I'm doing my best. Some days better than others, sometimes foolish, sometimes not so good, but I'm trying to be obedient so that I can be ready. Wisdom. That's a good word. It's a hard word. It's a word that challenges all of us. Dave Ramsey talks about stupid tax. When he talks about that, he means you've made stupid financial decisions. You got any of those that you've done? Karen and I have some. Yeah, boy, that was dumb. We sure blew that money. That was kind of foolish. We should have known better about that. And I guess it's okay for all of us to pay a little stupid tax, and it costs us a little money to learn and to get a little smarter. That's okay. And I guess, you put off going to the doctor for a little while, it'll be okay. Not the end of the world, but probably not very smart. All of these issues, I always thought that if your closets are really a mess, just wait until you die and your kids can mess with it. There's ways to think about all this. But please, the reason Jesus tells the parable is to remind us not to be foolish when it comes to eternity. And today, I hope you know Jesus. Hope you're doing wise things on a daily basis. And if you're not, this is a good day to make a commitment to solve those issues. So let's stand and let's sing. If you need to come, we invite you to do that right now.